So hello everybody, it's Mark McCurgo here from Host Leadership in London, and welcome to our webinar on using host leadership in healthcare and the police, both of which of course are important public services. And I'm joined today by our special guests, Anessa Ribert from Northumbria University. Say hello, Anessa.
Hello everyone.
Hello, and also Chris Miller from London, former senior police officer. Hello, Chris.
Hello everyone.
Hi. So we're just about to begin a conversation about host leadership and how it sits in public service, particularly in these two services. And the way I always start these presentations is with this key question, which I think is the question host leaders ask themselves all the time. Are you going to step forward or step back next? Are you going to step forward or step back next? And host leadership, as we'll see, is something like a dance between stepping forward and making something happen and stepping back and allowing other people to respond to that and being aware and thinking about when to step forward next. More about that in a moment, but we'll just say a few hellos. I'm Mark McCurgo. I'm a consultant, author and teacher, and been developing these ideas around leading as a host for over a decade now in various ways, and author of the book Host, 6 New Roles of Engagement, which came out last year, along with my colleague Helen Bailey. Helen would be with us today, but she's unfortunately caught the lurgy and is having a combination of loss of voice and coughing fits. So she's not able to join us, but we are joined by Anessa and Chris. So Anessa, please say hello and tell people a bit more about where you're from and what you do.
Hello everybody. My name is Anessa Ribert and I'm a senior lecturer in mental health at Northumbria University. Up in the north here it's freezing cold and raining. I've got a background in nursing of 20 years, having worked in various settings such as inpatient settings, acute inpatient settings, community services. Having managed 3 wards in my last role as a matron in Bristol. So hello, I noticed there was a lady in Bristol there. In a nutshell, basically that's what I do. But also, you know, I take quite a responsibility, even though I'm not clinical anymore, and I sit on the Northern Board for the Royal College of Nursing, and I'm working at the minute with the Royal College of Nursing around various issues. And I also I work as a trustee for the charity Papyrus, which is for the prevention of young suicide. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea about me.
Thanks very much, Anessa. That's great. And Chris, hello. Say a bit about yourself, please.
Hello, right. I am Chris Miller. I now work for myself. I also volunteer in prisons and in an unemployment mentoring charity that I helped found. I work in children's safeguarding and I do a bit of work in technology and social justice, but I suppose I'm here today because I was a police officer for 32 years and became quite a senior leader, and I still take a considerable interest in how the police operate today. I write articles, I'm a frequent communicator with the Times newspaper on various matters around policing. And I have a career still in social justice and crime and child protection, so that's me.
So thank you both for joining me today. I've been lucky enough to meet Anessa and Chris on my various travels and work with Solution Focus and indeed host leadership around the country, and I'm very excited that they're both here today, and they're very keen on the idea of host leadership, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with them about that. So here's what's going to happen on the webinar. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to host leadership. Then we're going to get onto the challenges that leaders face in the public service today, particularly in healthcare and in police settings. And then we'll talk about how host leadership might be the start of addressing some of those challenges. So feel free to input questions or comments at any time. Use the questions box on your control panel and I will relay your stuff to everybody else. So let's begin. I started off with this idea of host leadership by hearing this quote said by a very clever German professor over a decade ago. The host is both the first and the last, he said. The host is both the first and the last. And I thought, oh, that's the leader, isn't it? The leader is the first and the last. And started wondering about the connection between leading and hosting, and had also already come across servant leadership, but was not totally satisfied with the way that servant leadership ideas work and play out, and was looking for something different. And the conclusion I've come to over the last decade and more is that leading is a relationship, not a role. We talk about the role of the leader, but actually leading is about a relationship. You need at least two people for there to be leading going on. And so the relationship between the leader and the led, those are not very good words, but between the people involved is really crucial. And the relationship differs according to which way you think about leadership. And of course, the definition of a host in the Oxford Dictionary is a person who receives and entertains guests. And so the relationship we're talking about with host leadership is the host and guest relationship. And that actually turns out to be a very, very rich and multi-leveled relationship. It's one that is surprisingly everyday, and yet has, actually, when you dig into it, many, many, many aspects. One of the classic ideas around leadership that's been around for a millennia now, and is still with us, is the idea of the leader as hero. And the leader as hero, this comes from, of course, the classical tales of the Greeks and the Romans and everything else. The idea of the leader as the hero who leaps in, saves the day, single-handedly turns the tide, and steps forward and sorts everything out, and it's all because of them. And it's a very compelling idea in our culture, this idea of the leader as hero. But if we think about the relationship that's involved with leading as a hero, the other people become the rescued people. The other people become the ones who get saved by the hero. And while that might be okay in a crisis, it's not, I think, the basis, the relationship that's the basis for a sustaining, generative, empowering, continuing development of an organization. So I think the relationship that is implied by the hero leader model is not a very useful one. But with the host model, we have a different kind of relationship. And in the time I've been sort of looking at this idea of leading as a host, I came to a conclusion that it's a very paradoxical relationship, the host-guest one, because hosts are responsible for their guests. In other words, you come into someone's house and they're kind of responsible for your safety and your consideration and your welfare and so on. And of course, that was true very much in the ancient times when people used to simply knock on each other's doors and ask for hospitality, because there were no travel lodges or premier inns in those days. It's how you got about. But the host is responsible for the guest, and also the host looks after the guest and serves the guest. So in one sense, the host is, if we think about it hierarchically, the host is above the guest and also below the guest, responsible for the guest and serves the guest as well. And of course, that's the dance of stepping forward and stepping back that I talked about earlier. Sometimes the host must be first and be responsible. Sometimes the host serves the guest first and looks after themselves last. And this relationship, I think, can offer a very, very interesting metaphor for leading in a post-heroic time, if you like. The idea of the hero leader is in the academic literature has been written off for decades, but it's surprisingly persistent in real life. And I think we're going to hear a bit about that from Anessa and Chris when we come to it. So thinking about leadership challenges then, as Chris just disappears for a moment, thinking about the leadership challenges that face leaders in public services. Let's come to you first, Anessa. I've got a couple of things here. One is the rise of VUCA environments, as they're so called, which are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. So where the old leadership decisions don't make sense anymore. And the other is the idea of wicked problems, which are problems that have no edges and no ends and no boundaries. and so therefore you can't just sort them out and they're all done with. You do something and things move on. So the role of the leader becomes less about making decisions and more about gathering people together to grapple with difficult, challenging issues. So those are some things I see overall in the kind of the world of organisations here in 2015. What's your take on the challenges, Vanessa, in healthcare and in nursing in particular that people are facing right now?
I think I don't know quite where to start at the moment. Nursing's having there's a lot of debate going on at the moment in relation to nursing and healthcare, and we're looking. It's almost to like reinvent what we're doing, and second guess what needs to be contemporary and lead in that direction. So from the level of the chief nursing officer, who's had this summit actually the last 2 days, a lot of leadership going on in that direction, right away down to the core of the the grassroots level with the nurses making decisions in hospitals or in community teams. This idea of bringing people together in order to address complex decision, things that need to be done, complex situations. I think the role of initiator that you pick out in this particular model is very powerful.
Okay, so just hold on before we get to the roles of initiators. So what's the challenge that you're seeing that nurses perhaps are facing in acting as leaders right now?
There's a number of difficulties. Nurses are incredibly pressured at the moment. Absolutely, it's on the news. You hear it all of the time about numbers of nursing, staffing levels. People are feeling that they're just doing the basic minimum in order to maintain safety. So some of the complex, decisions or things that people would like to do are perhaps not getting looked at quite as much as what people would like to. Saying that wouldn't be compromising safety. We've got a lot of things we need to put in place in order to make sure people are safe. I think that it's something about ownership for me. We talk about leadership at every level, and that was something that came across with the review and certainly with the Willis report as well, looking at how nurses from student level right away through the hierarchy need to take on the role of being a leader. I think in some places, perhaps that's not being owned all of the time, whether that comes down to confidence, whether it comes down to what we're teaching in education in some places, I don't know. And I think that there are very different ideas of what leadership is out there, what the nurses are experiencing, what the students are experiencing. It somehow becomes this eclectic kind of almost misnomer. They know where it is, and they know what it is when they see it done well, but they're not really quite sure what it is. So, and going back to your model, I'm not going to step ahead of this, Mark, I think it gives people a really good starting point and a good metaphor in which to work from and to internalise, really, because it sits a lot with common human values, if you like. And you can explore that throughout the whole metaphor of host. I think will give some continuity because people were taught leadership at different times. There's different models, politically different drivers. So you've got some people who operate from the idea of hero, some from servant.
Yes.
And there's perhaps not always that consistency. While people are trying their best, to lead in a very complex, difficult environment, sometimes there can be different ideas about what that is.
Absolutely. So, and I think the King's Fund even wrote a report a few years ago called No More Heroes, didn't they? Where they were sort of saying that there's too much heroic leadership and people are going gung-ho, and that's not pulling people together. So you're talking there about leadership at all levels, which I think is a really interesting point, and we'll come back to that. And also you're talking about people being very pressured, and there being loads and loads of things to look after, and leadership is one of those. But that's got to sort of take its place amongst everything else in a busy hospital environment. Chris.
Yeah. Sorry.
Vanessa, carry on. If you have something to add.
No, I was going to say, in all of this and the whole context that we can't even imagine or begin to cover right now certainly in relation to healthcare and what's going on, there's something there for me about, how we look after our leaders, you know, and that's probably, I think, in a lot of situations, preventing people from growing and extending their leadership because of the pressures that they're experiencing, and perhaps not always being nurtured. Now, I don't want to make it all sound like it's awful, because there's some excellent leadership and care going on out there. But obviously, like everything, it exists on a continuum, doesn't it? And there's something for me about a whole organisation having a perspective of what leadership is, and, you know, nurturing and holding that, and not just expecting that to come down to specific individuals. And the book that's jumping to my mind right now is Intelligent Kindness. There's a book called Intelligent Kindness, who can't at the top of my head be reminded of the author. That talks about organisation leadership and supporting people.
Intelligent Kindness. We'll find that out. Thank you, Anessa. So, Chris, we're talking there about people being under pressure and leadership at all levels. Let's move to looking at the police force context at the moment. What's happening in that world that's a challenge for leaders right now?
Well, you know, the financial constraints that are currently at large in British public life have taken a toll on police finances. Very significant reductions in public spend, up to the tune of sort of 40% since 2010, and that's looking up. So in 10 years, it will have lost 40% of its budget, and it hasn't really yet, as a service, thought about how it's going to make up the gap in terms of efficiency. So I think there's a bit of feeling of I don't know, perhaps helplessness around that in the police service to some extent. You know, what are the government doing to us? So I think that's a challenge that leaders need to work with. How can we be more efficient and effective with the smaller amount of money we've got? And there are probably some big, you know, there's some big changes that the police could make in terms of delayering. There's a very lot of ranks in the police, and every time you add another layer of promotion or organisation into a big body, you suck energy from the body. So I think being able to think radically about how the police organise themselves to be more effective is a big challenge for them, because the police is also dominated by quite a lot of local politics. So everybody has a view on what should happen to their police force, their police station, their police officer, and the idea that the police might become more efficient by regionalising and cutting out layers and cutting out functions is quite a hard one to deliver. Mm-hmm. I think the other problem is that police problems are quite complex. I mean, the society is complex, and the problems they deal with are quite complex, and they need a lot of sort of nuanced thought, and there's a lot of things that come together to make a police problem. So whether it's antisocial behaviour on a state, or sex crime or domestic violence, and yet there's a political and a media-driven requirement for short, simple answers, and correlating the need to deliver quick answers to long-term complex problems presents the police with a problem. And it, in terms of its leadership pool, police officers are recruited on a certain skill set, which is about going in to a situation and creating order out of chaos and moving on, and that's very important. But that skill set doesn't necessarily translate into sort of medium level or senior leadership roles, where you have to have a much more sort of sympathetic and comprehensive understanding of the environment around you in order to make a long-term difference. So I think those are big challenges, is the sheer scale of what needs to be done to address the funding cuts, which can be done, but politically is difficult, and the way that police officers are recruited means that the gene pool from which leaders are selected is quite a small one. They're selected for very good reasons, because they have a certain skill set, and that doesn't necessarily translate vertically up the hierarchy.
Right. So we're getting from you, Chris, then this idea of needing to do more with less, needing to delayer, and this idea of working with complex problems, which ties in with my slide here about VUCA environment, and also this idea of the role changing as you go up the ranks, I guess, from
Yes.
from sort of operational levels to more senior levels, where you have this more sympathetic, comprehensive understanding thing that you mentioned, which may not be natural for somebody who's sort of steeped in the lower level decisive action.
That's right.
And of course, the College of Policing just this summer released a leadership review where they talk specifically about wanting, again, to move on from a heroic leadership standpoint to one where the leader's role was to ensure the team's success rather than shape the team in their image. So I think we're seeing lots of challenges there in both areas. Let's move on to start to talk about what we might do about this then, how host leadership might be able to help. So Anessa, thinking about what you were talking about in terms of leadership at every level, how can host leadership begin to help in a nursing or healthcare setting?
I think, you can apply this obviously in lots of different levels. I'm just going to take the example of the nurse, the newly qualified nurse, working on a ward. I like the idea of this, noticing what's needed in a call to action, as part of that initiator role, yeah. And I think that would give nurses a bit of confidence to be able to start somewhere, yeah, and bring in the people who need to be there for complex decision making, say around an individual's care pathway or something like that. I think it gives it gives them the ability to start at a good starting point. I think also that that is also translatable across a manager's role, obviously a matron's role, across the senior manager's role, but just obviously from a different perspective. So they might be looking at bringing people together in relation to finances or relation to commissioning services or whatever that needs to happen in that particular area.
So I do think just a moment. Anessa is talking about these one of the 6 roles of engagement that Helen and I developed for our book Host, and I've just pulled up a slide here that talks about them. These are different ways that host leaders can step forward and move things along. And one of them is, which Anessa just mentioned, is the initiator role, the top one, which is the one that's about seeing something that needs doing or needs to be, is a priority that needs addressing and is not yet being addressed, and then starting to engage people, the one who sort of puts their hand up and starts to engage people that this is a priority and to give it some attention. So the one who kind of kicks things off. And it does strike me, thinking about the nursing context, that in a way, I guess, Anessa, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the nurse is the one who is closest in some ways to the patient in all of this, the one who sort of has a relationship that runs along all the time, or through time, and therefore is in a very good position to notice priorities and things that may be appearing. Is that it?
Absolutely, and I mean it's part of the nurse's role anyway to identify care as part of an assessment and a care planning process. The planning, implementation, and evaluation of that care. I think starting with the idea of initiator is first and foremost is something that they can do, not only fits in with what their role is in relation to NMC standards and what they must achieve in relation to job role, but it brings in, you're talking about this idea of leadership. It's almost like, yes, I can initiate this, I've noticed something, there's a call to action here, something needs to change, and I have the ability and I can do this, I can bring people together to do this. And sometimes people, depending on where they are in relation to feeling a bit novice in their role, can need a little bit of support with that. And I think by engaging with your particular model is something that will give people confidence in order to follow through those stages. So I think it's a brilliant starting point. Absolutely.
One of the things that people do say about the idea of host leadership is that we've all been hosts. It's something that we've all experienced. We've all been guests, and we kind of know what good hosting looks like. So nobody's starting from scratch in an exploration of this, but there's many angles and aspects to be explored. And that's very, very interesting that you mentioned there the newly qualified nurse who might be feeling a bit novice, but perhaps needs confidence to put the hand up occasionally and start to draw people's attention and engage other people around something that looks like a priority.
Absolutely. We have there's a whole model out there, I've spoken to you before, Mark, about the models that can be superimposed on top of if the model that you've defined, the metaphor that you've defined. We talk about nurses, Bernard talks about the novice to the expert, etc. So you can apply this, your host leadership, in relation to whether you are a novice or you feel you're an expert in your area. And I think that familiarity of being a host, of bringing people into your home and having hosted it in a party, and the kind of the movement that you would endure at that particular time around your house and the kitchen, all the stuff that I'm sure you want to talk about, is something that's familiar and integral to most people. And I think that by connecting with that, something that's familiar and something that's comfortable, that's something that you can apply and take to your work environment. Sometimes I think, and I can't talk for everybody, but certainly for myself and things that I have observed through working in health service, it's almost like leadership is this kind of outside concept that people can't quite grasp. And I think the best leaders, the ones that I've seen, are the people who are able to internalize and connect with it, in another way, also almost on an emotional level, as well as that intellectual level. They're able to combine both of that, and be able to, create that environment around them. And I think the host model is something that you can connect with because you've experienced that, or most people have experienced that at some point in their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got a question coming from Rita, who I think is calling from Germany. Rita says, in my view, being an initiator was always the job of the leader. What's specific for the host in that? That's a good question, Rita. So we're looking around at what hosts do. Hosts usually decide to do something. They feel the need for something to happen, like we should celebrate something or we should gather together, and then they start to make it happen. So for me, this initiator role is about hearing what's being called for and then starting to do something about it. And when we looked at what hosts actually do, they say, I want to have a thing about this. Let's do this. And then they start engaging other people, typically by inviting others to get involved or starting to define what is the thing that they want. And I think a host is not a sort of passive recipient of guests at all. Hosts encourage relationships and start relationships and reach out with this, I call it a welcoming hand, to engage other people in things that they think are important. And by being the host, you are in a way able to set some boundaries and key elements of what's the thing that you're trying to do, here, and invite other people to join in with that. So you're not just sort of inviting people to anything at all. You're making a call, if you like, about something that's important. And I think that fits very well with the hosting metaphor. Chris, we've been talking about sort of newly qualified nurses on the one hand. Let's move this to maybe perhaps a more senior level. How are you seeing host leadership perhaps being a part of the challenge of the police officer who's rising through the ranks and now has to take on some of these longer term and more complex issues?
Well, I mean, policing it's a sort of a funny combination of both individual enterprise and a team-based activity, so that good police teams operate collectively, and a good leader therefore has to operate as a host by getting the best out of the people that they have working for them. But when those individuals go out to carry out their function, whether it's taking a statement from a particularly sort of vulnerable victim, or interviewing a difficult suspect, or trying to retrieve some forensic evidence from a dark place, that person is operating with an individual skill set, but needs to operate on behalf of the team. So and the host leader in the police needs their team of officers and police staff to both feel confident to exercise a set of their set of personal skills and their personal independence, while at the same time operating on behalf of the team. So if you as a leader just want to tell everybody what it is they've got to do, that's what you'll get. You will get them doing what you've told them, but you won't necessarily get any enterprise, ingenuity, or sort of capacity building. So good police leaders take their teams with them by inviting them to grow into the task. Every police leader needs to get 5% more out of their person, per year working for them than they got last year. And the only way to do that is to encourage them, invite them in, give them space so that they can develop, ensure that they stick to task, and connect them to the right people and the right events that are going to move it forward. And from time to time demonstrate their own ability to get their hands dirty and to demonstrate understanding. So I think that all works in terms of leadership and hosting.
So you're talking there about connecting people with other people and with other resources. And when I got to do an exercise, I go around talking about host leadership, and I usually invite people to do an exercise about what a good hosts do. One of the things that always comes up is good hosts introduce people to each other, and I think this is another key element of this way of thinking about leadership is the value of the leader not so much being the hub of information, but by creating a web with all the people interacting together in ways that they can do directly, and sort of bypassing, if you like, the host leader in terms of getting on and sharing stuff and doing things. I've got a question here from Emma in New Zealand, who says, "Hi Chris, I work as a psychologist for police in New Zealand, and suffice to say we don't have host leadership here. To the extent police are leaving in droves, any ideas how to influence the development of this when they currently won't see the leadership style as creating this mass exodus of great long-serving officers?"
But I suppose there's two aspects there. Do the great long-serving officers who are leaving in an exodus, do we think that they would like to be led by a host leader, or have they imbibed, the police culture down many years and just want to be told what to do? Is it they're not being told what to do, or do they want to be involved more in the planning of their own work and developing their ways forward, I suppose? So that's the question back, really. Mm-hmm. Can Emma hear me? Or
yes, she certainly can hear you, and she maybe she can respond via our question, or if she'd rather sort of just talk about it, we can also make a live. So Emma, if you want to talk about it, please raise your hand using the icon thing, or type in a response to Chris there, and we'll see if we can move that along. While we're thinking about the issue of leadership style, Anessa, what leadership style do you see, or styles do you see prevalent in the health service and hospital environment, and how is that perhaps changing or looking to change at the moment?
I think it's an eclectic mix. I couldn't say that I see any one style. I've seen many of transformative is usually what people aim for, but not everybody manages that. I've seen an eclectic mix, Mark. I think people are calling for something different. The NHS does have their own leadership programme that invite many nurses to go on, senior nurses to go on every year. It is aimed at senior nurses, and which is great, because we know the cascading lead by example and all the rest of it is really important. But I think that we need to get away from and shift away from just focusing leadership at leaders and managers. It needs to be across the entire spectrum. And I just want to pick up on a point that we made before about police officers leaving in droves and nurses leaving in droves at the moment. And there's something inherent with this model in relation to hosts tend to serve other people first and themselves last. I'm wondering if there's something there that we need to rethink about, because inherently by the nature of the role and the job, that's what we tend to do. And that has an impact upon the, personal being and wellness and energy. And I think that perhaps could be an explanation as to why people are getting to the point of feeling burnt out, with all the financial implications and the pressures that are happening right now. People want more for less. People are having to work 3 times as hard when they're already on their knees. So there's something there, I think, about, yes, being a host and everything that brings and the wonderful metaphor around that. But is there some point where we have to look at ourselves as hosts, as leaders, and think about ourselves within that?
Yes. I think that's a key part of it. And sometimes the common thing I come across is leaders who are quite good at being first, at making things happen, but are less good at being last, if you like, and being seen to put others first. And that's there are other leaders. Occasionally, I find leaders who are in the other bracket, who are very good at being last and very supportive, but they might be able to consider them, stepping forward a bit more and making things happen and energizing things in their own way. So I've got a reply from Emma here. Now let me just get this up here. So Emma says they want to be involved, heard, and respected. The exodus has only begun since new leaders came in recent years. The new regime has ushered in many changes that have added pressure, with reduced service and resulting in police feeling they are unable to be effective in their work. Happy to discuss this offline. So would you, Chris, would like to sort of comment on that or think about?
Well, I mean,
relates?
Policing is a very political business in every country in which it operates, because the police are they are the monopoly users of force on their own citizens. So therefore, there's always a lot of politics about how they use the power that's given to them. And so, if there is something going on in the leadership of the police, there is probably a step back from that, which is there's something around the politics which is driving the leadership. So I would imagine that these new leaders in New Zealand must be responding to either some form of media demand that they do something, that's always the thing, or politicians are asking for some very visible sign of the fact that their money that they're putting into the police is delivering things, and that's cut crime, arrest people, and clear up crime. And you can deliver some fairly simple and quick results, set those tasks, but they tend not to be very long-lasting or very clever generally.
Yeah.
And police officers, when they're invited to go and enforce the law, they're capable of doing that, but generally they realise that's quite a narrow way of giving sort of peace to the citizens that they're trying to serve. So there's probably complicated things going on. I suspect it's not just about New Zealand police leadership. It's probably about New Zealand politics. How do you change that? That's a big tanker to turn around, and the government has got to start having a debate with its own people about how they want the police to operate, and that gradually has to work. I mean, that's a 5-year program at the least, I would have thought.
So one of the things that's striking me in what you're saying, Chris, is that you can sort of act heroically and arrest the usual suspects and enforce the law and all of that. But as you say, I think those kind of initiatives can often, they show a short-term win, but actually the long-term result is people falling back into just doing what they're told, as you mentioned earlier, and you're not getting the great added value. Whereas if we look at leadership as about bringing people together, yes, maybe that doesn't pay off on day one, but it has a gradual build and a gradual thing that I think over time starts to develop something really interesting. That's how I would view it anyway. Kat, who I think is calling in from the United States, has a point to make and will lead us into our next area of conversation. She says that many people are used to being told what to do and then following those directions from their manager/leader. Comments on how a host leader would begin changing that behavior to a more participative environment. So I think this is perhaps a question about how might you start to be host leader, and how might you start to engage that with others? I mean, I have some thoughts on that, obviously, but I'm going to invite Nessa and Chris perhaps to have a quick go first, if you'd like. Thoughts on how you might start to engage folk in this way.
Well, if you're trying to deliver change, you always need somebody else to at least to want to come with you on the journey as a coalition of the willing. So there needs to be at least one other person in your team, preferably exercising some form of supervision or leadership role, that gets it. That if you try and force collaborative working on people who just want to be told what to do, then that's quite difficult. You need a couple of you actually to sort of create the vision, and you need to have some fairly simple things that people feel they're trying to achieve and for which they receive rewards, and those rewards aren't monetary rewards or anything else. They are just the sheer, thanks for a job well done. So if the team has got a set of collective goals that they understand that are simple and deliverable, and people are given a degree of self-determination as to how they achieve the goal, so you allow them to make mistakes in achieving their goal, and that gradually creates space for them to become more innovative and productive. I mean, I used to say, when people came into my office and said, exactly what is my job description, I always used to say, that's the wrong question. The question is, exactly how can you use your influence and your skills to make a difference? If you want to know to the minute detail exactly what your job description is, then probably I'm not, you and I haven't necessarily going to have the right relationship. So for some people, that's a very uneasy way, that's a very unhelpful and uneasy way of being invited to operate, and some people can't cope with that, or they need to be drawn into it very slowly. Others take to it like duck to water. So it's having a tightly focused goal as to what you want to achieve, and then having some fairly loose I don't know, some loose ties as to how they achieve it, and then being fairly tightly focused on the behaviour and the attitudes they display. So I'm going to be very keen that people behave well. I want to be very keen and be very tightly focused on their behaviour. I want them to work towards a goal, but how they achieve it, I want them to try and work that out as a team and with me, so that they've got some self-determination. So that really is how I try to operate as a police leader, and some liked it, loved it, and others couldn't stand it because they wanted to be told what to do.
Yes. So coming to translating that into the roles that we have on the screen in front of us. So the initiator role is about picking a thing that you think needs addressing, and then engaging in trying to engage and invite the inviter role other people to join you. As you say, you want to reach out and find someone else or some other people who think that's an important thing, and then you've got a group of you together, and then you can start to act as being the one who brings them together and starts the discussion going, creates a good space for that discussion, and can act as the gatekeeper, if you like, the enforcer of boundaries. So you talked about behaving well. There's probably some standards of behavior, and it's good to be clear on some of those things and say, look, this is great, that's not great, that's not going to be tolerated, and so on. And that's a sort of gatekeeping type of role. Yes. And then you talked about doing it with you. They're doing it with you, absolutely. And so we have the co-participator role at the bottom there, which is about this idea of you're not only the leader of this kind of group, you're also one of the players in it, one of the participators, and you may not participate in quite the same way as everybody else, but as a host, one of the key things we discovered in our research about what hosts do is that they eat the same food as their guests, and if they don't, it looks very odd. So and the metaphor for that is that you're participating in the thing as well as leading it in some way, and of course that produces a lot of, hopefully, a lot of good respect and a lot of good input and influence within the other people. Anessa, just the thoughts from you on how a nurse, say, who wanted to think of herself or himself as a as a host leader might start to influence other people?
Well, I'm just smiling at what Chris is saying, and you know, being cast back in time with previous clinical situations. But there's always this saying that comes to my mind, which is never ask anybody to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. As part of that leadership role, and the co-participation, it's just rolling up your sleeves and getting stuck in as well, you know, leading by example. And although you're leading, you might be in that situation as leader manager, that you still have to prove that you can get down there and get stuck in with everybody else as well. There's something for me about absolutely believing in that the other people have got the answer to whatever the problem is, or to whatever you're trying to address. And by facilitating particular questions and helping them to come up with alternatives is what I found being a really good strategy. So, for example, in a clinical situation, it would be, you know, we have to put this person into the high dependency unit setting. Well, I kind of banned that because there's no such like national standards for high dependency units. It doesn't exist. So I said to him, before you do that, before you get to that level, you need to find 3 different alternatives, come back with 3 different alternatives that you can do before you actually get to that point, which is, you know, which is really not acceptable if you don't look at other ways of working with an individual. So it's about investing in other people and giving them the opportunity to come up with an answer. And by that, getting the confidence and gaining the confidence and knowing that they can come up with the answer if they're used to being told. So you're just offering the other alternative all of the time. Yeah, you're offering and asking them to come up with that in relation to their skills and their knowledge.
Absolutely. So I've got another question here from Zareen, or Z, I think she was calling herself, who says, any words on the role of the guest? The host is not always the senior responsible officer, to use project management language. How to handle it when a guest won't cooperate? ? Each culture has its rules about how to be a good guest. How does guesting play out in the public sector culture like ours, where the concept of nanny state is still alive and strong? Well, I'll offer an initial thought, and then I'll ask our panelists about that. I think the idea of good hosts have to kind of train good guests in a way, and show them what good guesting looks like, and gently teach them about, you know, the rules and the house rules and how it goes, and also model the process, model being good guest. We find that people who've learned how to be good hosts also know really well how to be good guests, and so that's part of it. And as you're establishing a host leadership environment, yes, you'll be establishing ways of behaving and ways that we act within this particular context. And we find that hosts are very good at defining these things. Of course, what those rules are, if you like, or house routines, perhaps, it will depend on the situation. But I think that by acting as a host, you naturally encourage people to be good guests, and they will learn that over time. And you could, of course, spot that and affirm it and reinforce it, and so on. And you're right about the culture. Each culture has its rules about how to be a good guest, and I think host leadership probably looks slightly different in different cultures. So host leadership in China will look slightly different to what it does in the UK or the USA, because they have different expectations, but that'll be fine. So guests, Chris and Inessa, thoughts about the role of the guest in all this?
Well, I suppose if you're going to, sorry, Inessa, I'll just take this one. If you have a party, you invite people on the whole that you want to be there. So we're assuming that these guests are not gate crashers. And if people you invite to your party, we just continue with the analogy here a bit, behave very badly, you generally get a bit cross with them and try and reset the rules, and you're never going to invite them again if they don't sort of fess up and start behaving themselves. So you take that into your team as the host leader. The one thing that you are responsible for is setting the tone of the team that you're leading. In the same way, if I'm a host, I'm to some extent in control of the atmosphere and the environment of the party. So I think that becomes a fairly direct conversation with a very badly behaved guest that, you know, this is my party, this is the team that I'm honoured to lead, this is the tone of this team, this is the way we're going to behave, this is these are the behaviours that I'm not prepared to negotiate on. How we achieve the end goal, which we've agreed as a team, is something that you're going to contribute to. And if you don't want to come on this journey with the rest of these lovely guests, the rest of your team, then you need to go and take a walk and go somewhere else. That's not always easy in the public sector world, because inviting people to leave your team isn't terribly easy. But I think that has to be it, really. There comes a point when even the most genial host has to bare their teeth.
Absolutely.
But that's what you do with very badly behaved guests if after a while they're not prepared to go with the atmosphere in the party.
I think that's right. It's if after a while. That's right. And they get lots of chances, and they get lots of reminders, and so forth. So because
they ruin it for everybody else. I mean, as a host leader, your job is to provide a great party for everybody that turns up. As a public sector leader, your job is to run a team that everybody enjoys contributing to, and what you can't afford to have is one negative influence that drives all the that drains all the energy out of the battery. So because the whole team becomes ineffective, so you can't carry on with somebody that's prepared to, or either is prepared to or unwittingly damages what you're trying to achieve. And leaders do need to stand up from time to time, but what you want them to do is to do that in the context of how we run the team, which is that we are collegiate, we work together, we have focused goals, and we behave in a way towards each other and towards the people we serve.
Absolutely. And one of the things that comes up if thinking about the metaphor of the host is that in the end the host is the one person who is entitled to chuck people out of their party, and nobody else can do that. So, and of course, this is a sort of final, I suppose, sanction. I'm getting quite interested in the difference between having house rules and house routines at the moment, which is how you teach people what is expected and remind them of what's expected and applaud them when they do what's expected. And gradually people learn how to behave. And it takes a little bit of time to do that. But that's the process. So you don't throw them out for the first violation. You have to make clear where the boundaries are, I think. We've got a couple of other comments here. Kat, who raised this topic, was saying, thanks for the great comments. Co-participating by the leader and including them in the conversation seems to be key in having people see that a change is happening. Yes, absolutely. And Rita asks, do you have some examples of leaders that act like hosts? Well, there are a few sort of well-known ones who I think acted largely like hosts. I would include, for example, Nelson Mandela in that. Was a very tough politician and knew how to hold his corner in an argument, but he reached out again and again and again to people he should have hated and tried to embrace them and draw them into conversations, and succeeded in really incredibly difficult circumstances. So many great Mandela stories, and some of them are in our book, Host, of which more in a moment. I see lots of leaders who have some elements of hosting to them, and they tend to enjoy, confirming that, and then also exploring some of the other elements that we find. So we might think, for example, closer to home in some of the Soul World community and other places like that, we have some very, very good host leaders who set up a brilliant event and then welcome everyone and make them feel so welcome in that respect. I know Nessa has dropped offline, by the way, so we're continuing just for the last couple of minutes in Mark and Chris only, while she maybe comes back or not. John Brooker says, I think Dee Hocker's Visa was a host leader too, as a suggestion, and Dee Hock was famously designed Visa, I think I'm right in saying, as an organisation that was very, very self-organising and nobody quite understood how it worked. So I think people who embrace this idea of connectedness seem to move to me in the direction of leading as hosts. And this, of course, connects up with Frederic Laloux's book that's been very influential at the moment, Reinventing Organizations. And for me, this idea of leading as host goes very well with moving in the direction that Laloux is talking about, from closely managed to more self-managed and self-organizing types of process. Chris, the thoughts about people you've seen?
Well, I suppose I end up talking about people that nobody's ever heard of, really.
But just give us maybe a story of somebody, even if we've never heard of them. It'd be interesting to hear you.
Well, I think probably one of my very senior leaders that I worked with as I was leaving the police, who was the chief constable in Hertfordshire. He had almost no ego. He was a very unusual among senior police leaders, in that he really did live by the that saying, it doesn't matter who takes the credit, provided we get things done. And he did foster a team environment that enabled pretty much to do anything that you wanted to do, provided you were focused on the team agreed goals. And that was a pretty happy time for me, and I think the colleagues that worked with him, because he was very driven in terms of what he wanted to achieve, and he was very focused on the way he wanted people to behave, but he was very relaxed about... Hello? Have I lost connection?
No, yeah, you're fine. Carry on.
Hello? Oh no, sorry, I just had a thing come up. But he was very relaxed about the means whereby the goals were achieved. So the behaviour and the attitude and the outward-facing nature of the police, very fixed on that. What we wanted to do, very fixed on that. How we did it, that's a matter for you and your department. So I think he pretty much had the host role pretty well taken. Although he was a very, very shy man, which was sort of quite unusual for a genial host. But he certainly had all the other facets you would want, really.
Yes, well, I think that thing about low ego and focusing on getting the job done and perhaps other people definitely sharing the credit is a key part of this. I think people who are involved closely probably know who was to blame for these results in a way.
Yes.
But it's not that perhaps it's not the big standing on the top step and going hurrah 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 type of thing a lot of the time. Well, folks, we're coming towards the end.
Well, I mean, the thing is, most.
Just coming towards the end of the session. So we have one more question from Rita, which we can just try and take quickly. I think every metaphor has its own narrowness, she says. Do you see any for the host regarding to leaders? That's an interesting question. I think that there's a thing about context, and I think that there probably will be some contexts where the host will in a crisis, for example, the host moves into somewhat hero mode. Whereas so that might be one of the limitations, but I think it's early days in exploring these ideas yet. The servant leadership idea has been around for 30 or 40 years and is still kind of gaining ground, and many people still haven't heard of it. So we've got a long way to go in this, and I think that the exploration is really just beginning, and having these kind of conversations, and those of you who come today to join in with this conversation, thank you very much indeed. This is part of developing these ideas and sharing them and helping to move them on. So Z says, thanks for a great call. Mark and Esther and Chris, very useful. And we're going to wind it up now. So for more inspiration and information, get hold of the book, which is on the screen, Host, from Amazon, also in Kindle form. Visit our website. We're on Twitter at The Host Leader. We have a LinkedIn group where there are updates and discussions. That's a good way to connect with us. And looking out for events in the UK, and we're hoping to have a Host Leadership Day in 2016, perhaps a one-day event in London where we'll invite everyone who's interested in this to come together and join and share and be together. So I would like to thank Chris very much indeed for coming to join us today. Thank you, Chris. Thanks also to Anessa. And we hope you've all enjoyed this call. We're hoping to host more of these as time goes on. So it's very much a first step today. But thanks everyone. And Chris, just a final thought from you before we close.
Well, I mean, I think it's it's a challenge actually. Trying to this is a new model for leadership. The media and our politicians cry out for one thing when the world and reality cries out for something else. So the media are looking for sharp, snappy headlines and who's doing what, when and how, and really it's all pretty nuanced, and holding your nerve and sort of playing the longer game and working with the wider team is something that we all need to keep practicing, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good thought to close on for today. So thank you, Chris. Thank you to Anessa. Thank you everyone who's typing in their thanks into the questions box. Great for you all to join us. And thanks very much again. And cheers for now. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.